Well, today we're going to be making curtains. In this case, a small eyelet curtain. So it's a sample curtain, so obviously not real size. We're going to start with face fabric, which is cut to size, the lining, which we're going to make the bottom hem into, and let's begin. So we're going to turn up the bottom hem on the lining by approximately 6 inches. 15 centimetres if you're working in centimetres. It gets pressed in place and then turned up a second time to allow for it to be stitched in place. Three pins to hold it while it's being stitched on the machine. We do the same thing with the face fabric, but that gets turned up by a slightly larger amount. In this case it's 7.5 inches or 19 centimetres if you're working in centimetres. That means we have a much more solid hem on the curtain than we do on the lining. Solid hem makes a difference because it gives weight, adds density to the bottom of the hem, gives it an more even hold when you're trying to pull it into pleats. Occasionally on a curtain like this we might put curtain weights into the hem to hold it in place. That's more likely if it's going to be an interlined curtain rather than a normal lined curtain. This one will be normal lined. I'll show you a finished interlined curtain when we've done this, and then you can see the difference between the two. So that's going to get hand stitched, and that one will be machined. Hand stitching, very simple stitching. It's invisible, so it won't be visible from the face side once it's finished. Invisible hem means that it's hidden. I'll know where it is, and can be done on a machine, on a blind hemming machine, but in the whole great scheme of things it's never then actually hidden. Everything about it then is still looks machined. If you look at a ready-made curtain that has been blind hemmed, or in some cases flat stitched, you never actually don't see the stitching, which is the big difference between blind and ready-made and hand finished. This is often the most time-consuming part, purely because it needs to be right. No point rushing a blind hem. I'll turn that over. There's no stitching at all available from the front. So we'll continue across. The cotton used on a blind hem tends to be a lot thicker than a normal cotton. It's much heavier weight. So it's a single thread rather than doubled over normal cotton, which would tend to knot and not be as strong anyway. If this was an interlined curtain, instead of stitching the hem to the face fabric, the hem would get stitched to the interlining. Interlining a curtain will give it much more weight, much better lustre. It will hang totally differently because it's like putting a soft blanket inside a curtain. Ideal for lightweight curtains, nothing like this. This is just a simple cotton, so it's a printed cotton, so it would hang quite nicely on its own. But the main purpose for interlining a curtain would be to give it extra weight, to give it better draft excluding properties, and for it to hang really, really nicely. obviously everything about an interlined curtain is completely hand finished, so with this curtain, once the bottom hem is finished on this, the lining will get attached to it by machine, because that's the normal way to make a lined curtain. Once that's done, it's a very simple job to finish it off. With an interlined curtain, everything is hand finished, so even the sides of the curtain are stitched by hand. It takes the manufacturing time to virtually double, because the only thing that's machined on an interlined curtain is the bottom hem of the lining. Everything else, the top, the sides, all of the lining, all of the hems, everything is hand finished. You can finish it off at the sides, because the side is going to be turned in, so it doesn't matter if those stitches are visible, it's going to be hidden by the lining when it goes in to finish it off. That's our bottom hem on the face fabric, hand finished and invisible stitching. Okay, so the bottom hem of the face curtain is sewn, hand stitched and blind hemmed. The bottom hem of the lining is stitched in place by machine. Time to put the two together. Because it's only a half width curtain, there's not an awful lot of play on this. If we were joining more than one width together, that would be a width and a half, 2 widths, etc., then there would be an issue as to where the half width would finish when it came to making it up. For me, the half width should always go at the outside of the window, so if this had another width attached to it, this would be the right hand curtain. The reason being, you don't want any seams hanging in the middle of the window if you can possibly help it. And of course, when you come to put tape on the top of this, you want all the open strings at the outside of the curtain, so that's when you would make a conscious decision about where things are going to go. So to put the lining together, face fabric facing upwards, the face of the lining facing down, so we're basically making it inside out. So we need to measure the distance up from the bottom of the curtain where the lining is going to sit when it's finished. In this case, it will be around about 1 3/4 inches. Pinned at the sides. I'm going to pin all the way up one side. That's then ready for stitching straight down on the machine. On the other side, however, we need to shorten the width of the lining. If the lining is too wide, then you'll have no return on the curtain, so we need to make sure that we've got enough return on the curtain for it to hang nicely when it's finished, so you're not going to see any of the lining when it's all finished and made up. Measuring from the outside edge of the curtain, back across the lining, we're going to cut it to 6 inches. 6 inches from the edge of the curtain, that is, not 6 inches in from the edge of the lining. Making a small nip, straightening it up with the bottom edge, cutting through the stitches, and then, very satisfyingly, pull it apart. It doesn't need to be pulled apart or cut with a pair of scissors, purely because we're simply following the weave, and it will automatically take off in a straight line regardless. So with that in mind, we now have our hem 6 inches in from the end of the curtain. So with that pinned in place, we can pull the lining across to the opposite side, measure the same distance up, which is 1 3/4 inches, and pin at that side. That, when it's pinned all the way up, will also get stitched on the machine, and when it's stitched, we'll turn it back through and it will become a bag-lined curtain. So we'll finish pinning and then stitching. So everything's pinned in place. We know the bottom hem is set because we've pinned it all in the right place. All been measured. Simple case of then stitching. up the side hems, and measured distances, in this case using masking tape on my machine, to position away from the needle. Because both of these fabrics are cotton, there's no shift when we come to stitch in the opposite direction, so I can comfortably stitch in either direction. Some fabrics are more stretchy and have to be stitched in the same direction in both ways. That can confuse things a little. In this case, as I say, both fabrics are cotton, so we should be fine to go for straight stitching in either direction. That's everything in place. We're going to turn the corners in on the face fabric, which will give us a finished mitre, so when it's turned through, that corner won't show any of the selvage edges. So if we do that with the machine as well. And for this curtain, that's last machining. Okay, so hence we are now at the point of turning through. Bag lined means that it is sewn at the sides, it's fixed under the top, but it's open at the bottom, hence the bag. When we turned our corners in with the machine, that gave us a little mitre at either corner, which looks slightly unkempt at this point, but when we turn it through, that will then become part of the sides and will be hidden. So in this case, turning it through looks unsightly. But will come out quite nicely in the end. Just making sure all the inside edges are all sitting nicely. Now you can see the return that we were talking about. And the mitered corners sit nicely inside that return. So everything looks nicely finished off. This is the point at which we'll press the first time to hold those sides in to those returns. The next job is to finish, do the finished length. Because this is only a display curtain, it's not going to be very long. And we're putting eyelets into the top of this. So we are going to turn down only a small amount at the top because it will be held in place with buckram and with eyelets. We're going to make this curtain around about 28 inches, which is around about there. I'm going to do that by turning the top down with everything in place. You can lose that bit of line to begin with. You can see where we're going. So our finished 28 inches, that was a good guess. It's going to sit there. And then that gets pressed in place. Now we know what our finished length is, we can open that back out, and this is where fun begins with buckram. The buckram needs to be just slightly wider on both sides than the finished curtain, because we're going to turn the sides in, which will give us a little bit of extra stiffening at the sides. So that's now the right kind of size. That's going to go into one side. And be pressed in place along our crease. We've already made a crease in the buckram. That will, top of which will sit in the same line as the crease we made for the top of the curtain. Lining all of that up. And because we have a crease at this side, we know where the second crease is going to be in the buckram. Then everything will get turned down to cover the buckram in the right place. Quite easy on a small curtain this size. If you have, I'm smiling because if you have a 3-width curtain that you're trying to do this on, it can be like trying to wrestle an anaconda. Once that's in place, without steam on, this buckram is called double fusible, which means if you press it, then whatever you press with it will stick to it. I don't particularly want this to stick together, but I need to press this particular edge in place so that it stays where it is. So if I take the steam off, it will stop it sticking where I don't want it to, but give me a nice top to finish that up. So that's where our top is going to be. Everything's lined up front and back, but we need to pin through so that we hold the buckram where it is. When we start to put eyelets into the top, it's going to go in from the front, so we need to be able to move this without that buckram moving from where it is. So I'm just going to pin through at the bottom of the buckram, just to hold it in place at the top. At that point, we have a very nearly finished looking curtain, which all it's now missing are the eyelets that are going to be sitting inside the buckram. Deciding how many eyelets you need, obviously it's got to be an even number. We need an even number so that when the eyelet curtain's sitting on there, both of the returns return back to the wall. That's why it's called return. Sometimes I've seen curtains with an odd number of eyelets on, which means you get one going back and one coming forwards. That's not how it's supposed to finish. So this bit I do in centimetres. 58 centimetres is what we've got. We're going to divide 58 by the number of eyelets we're going to put in, which I think in this case will be 4. Which will give us a distance between the eyelets, and then we need to adjust so that the outside eyelet doesn't sit that far in from the edge of the curtain. It needs to sit half as much in from the curtain so that when it returns it's still the same depth as all the rest of the pleats. So the distance between the two middle eyelets is going to be 14.5. The ones at the side then are going to be 7.25. If that all makes sense, then I'm doing alright. 7.25 then means that the first eyelet at the sides is going to be there. Well, at the opposite side, because we always do the outside eyelets first because they are the fixed ones. The ones in the middle technically could be less than that. 14.5. And impressively 14.5 again. The system works. That's where our 4 eyelets are going to finish up. Right, 4 eyelets to pop. We've got an eyelet press, which is a fairly substantial piece of kit, and quite happy to take your fingers off if you're not careful with it. 2 parts to each eyelet. There's a back plate and a face plate. The back plate the face plate is rolled around the back plate, which holds it in place. So you have to have both pieces. If you just put the face plate in, it will roll around the fabric, but nothing will be held in place and it will fall out again because there's nothing on the reverse of it to hold it in place. So back plate we must put on first, because if we don't put it on then we're just making a hole and not doing anything with it. The pins now are for position of where the eyelet is going to go. So that pin needs to be lined up along the middle of the eyelet press. With the first eyelet, because there's nothing else to guide it, we need to be fairly particular with that. The back edge of the eyelet machine is what's going to be the top edge of the curtain, so that gives us a depth for the eyelet. So if we line that up with our pin, the pin can then come out. The first press makes a hole in the curtain. We need to take out the offcuts. The second part of the eyelet goes in. A little bit of elbow grease, pushes it all together, and that gives us a finished eyelet. The second eyelet uses the first eyelet for distance, so we're going to preload that onto the second part of the machine, which should give us a distance then to hold to the second eyelet. Now unfortunately all curtains are different, the measurements can vary, and in this case it does, so if I put that on there, then we can see that the pin is not central on where we're going to press our eyelet, so we need to move the anchoring eyelet outwards, no, inwards. Hang on a second, let me think about that. We're going that way, inwards. Hammer time. Lining it up again, nearly there. And then we're back to central again. Lined up at the top. Back plate must go in first because otherwise we're simply making holes in curtains. So first we're going to make the hole. Again, this is fairly simple on a small curtain like this. Imagine a curtain that might be 2 or 3 metres long, so you've got all the fabric under your feet. Good strong press and a lot of body weight will get that held in place. Eyelet number 2. Again, we're going to use that eyelet to position eyelet number 3. Back plate in place first. In theory, it should be in the right place. Not always the case. In this case it is. So we can take the pin straight out and make the hole. There are various different sizes of eyelets. This is the most popular size, which is a 40mm. There are smaller ones than that, but they tend to be more for decoration than for use. And there are larger ones for much bigger poles. Last eyelet in this case, we need to keep to the pin on this one. We can't adjust outwards or inwards. We have to go where that pin is because that is a fixed eyelet. It's a fixed return, so it has to be central regardless, and it is. Again, this is a fairly easy fabric to work with because they're both cotton fabrics, the lining and the face fabric. Chenille fabrics can be interesting when you have a couple of layers of that to get through. Nearly done. The pins can all come out. Just a bit more of a press in. Lovely. One finished curtain with 4 eyelets. The point about 4 eyelets is it's got to be an even number. So when it's pulled across your curtain, your pole, makes 2 beautiful pleats, and both of them return back to the wall. Nice even spacing. And there's your finished eyelet curtain.